exciting news. So the great importance to our state and our nation's energy independence obviously is oil. A lot of discussion about oil in the press lately. And for Alaska, it's always been a discussion about oil for the past several decades. It's what's helped transform the state, and it's what's going to help keep transforming the state as time goes on. So unfortunately, oil is becoming more and more difficult to bring to market because of a whole host of reasons. We've got some geopolitical issues happening across the world. We also have some changing attitudes and policies that are manifesting themselves as policy coming out of places like Washington, D.C. However, there is some good news, and the good news lies here in Alaska within our existing fields, actually. And so we're going to be talking about the heavy oil technology today that the University of Alaska has been an absolute leader on here in the state of Alaska. The professor is going to talk in a moment about what this technology looks like and how it was proved up here in Alaska. Of course, we have our challenges up here in Alaska. Mainly, we have to deal with permafrost. We have to deal with a climate that's a lot different than the Middle East and even the lower 48. But that's where the University of Alaska comes in, to be able to take this research and to be able to apply this research into a practical application. And I have to say that the university has done a fantastic job in this area. This research was initially supported by the federal government, but then once again, because of changing attitudes, that funding went away. The state therefore stepped in, and we've helped fund this technology. And we'll probably we'll keep funding this technology because there's a lot of frontiers with regard to oil recovery here in the state of Alaska, and this is just but one. So the process is called polymer flooding. We're going to let the professor, Dr. Danek here, explain it. And the potential resource identified is in heavy or viscous oil, or both, which is massive here in the state of Alaska. For example, within the West Sac formation itself, there is viscous oil in place of up to 12 billion barrels. 12 billion barrels. And that is significant when you realize that many of the plays that are being discussed here in Alaska and throughout the world don't come close to that magnitude. And when you also look at the Agnew formation, there's 12 to 18 billion barrels of heavy oil identified in place. That's equivalent to 2 Prudhoe bays. I repeat, that's equivalent to 2 Prudhoe bays if the tech proves out and can be deployed at scale. We still have lighter crude in fields like Prudhoe, Kapark, and soon Pika, and hopefully Willow, if we get through this issue with the courts, that can be blended with this heavy oil and shipped down the TAPS pipeline. So I want to congratulate the University of Alaska here at Fairbanks. I want to congratulate their partners, Hillcorp. This technology, I believe, is going to be proven up even further, scaled up, and will be a tremendous benefit to the state of Alaska. You'll hear some numbers here shortly in the neighborhood of anywhere from 50 to 75 to 125,000 barrels of oil here over the next few years. That's the equivalent of a new find in Alaska. And this can be done without having to get the permits from the federal government because we're already permitted. This is oil that will return royalty to the state of Alaska as well as tax to the state of Alaska. So this is great news for Alaska, great news for the industry, and great news for the University of Alaska because once again it proves itself as a leader in research, especially here in Alaska and in the Arctic. So with that, I want to turn this over to Chancellor Dan White to my right, and he's going to say a few words.
Great. Thank you, Governor Dunleavy. UAF is a world-class research university, and research done here at UAF is key to unlocking Alaska's economic future and training its workforce. I'd like to thank and acknowledge and appreciate Governor Dunleavy and the state of Alaska for their investment in research this year at UAF, not just in heavy oil, but also in drones, critical and strategic minerals, energy, mariculture, and agriculture. These areas are key to boosting Alaska's economic future and UAF research in unlocking Alaska's resources. UAF's petroleum engineering and mining engineering departments continue to support resource development and workforce training for Alaska's resources. And now I'd like to turn it over to Professor Abhijit Dandekar to say a few words about the heavy oil project. Thank you.
I'm going to help him out just a little bit here because this is kind of a homemade deal for myself, I think. So, Professor, I don't know how far you want to get. There you go.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Governor Dunleavy, Chancellor White. It is a distinct pleasure for me to participate in this press conference on a subject that I became interested in way back in the early 2000s because of the tremendous resource potential and the challenges that it brings in terms of recovery. We have been working on heavy oil for many, many years, but the real opportunity, excellent opportunity, actually came our way back in 2018. We found a very good industry partner, Hillcorp, and the project was funded. And now if I fast forward it to late 2022, so that is basically our claim that heavy oil polymer EOR works in the challenging Alaskan Arctic environment. So at this time, I also want to recognize Dr. Yin Zhang, who is sitting there, who is going to take over the next phase of this research of polymer alternating solvent, and also Brent Sheets, who is the director of PDL. So let's look at the resource base that we have on Alaska North Slope. The leftmost picture on the screen, that basically shows the three main units on Alaska North Slope with viscous and heavy oil resources that are actually sandwiched between Kuparuk and the permafrost. The depth versus oil viscosity plot on the rightmost side shows the viscosity versus depth. And as you can see on that plot, as the depth decreases, the viscosity increases because the oil is closer to the permafrost. Also shown on that graph are the three development phases on the extreme left, the green color. That's basically the light oil. Then something that's in the middle we call the viscous oils. That is being developed right now, and that's the focus of what I'm going to share in the next few minutes. But our next target is AGNU, which is 12 to 18 billion barrels that you see on the extreme right. So rather than lumping everything in heavy oil, here in Alaska, we use a homegrown term. Viscous oil means something that is actually water floodable. But heavy oil is something that is AGNU, for instance, that is not water floodable, and that is really our next target here. So, okay. Rather than lumping everything in heavy oil, here in Alaska, we use the homegrown term. Viscous oil means something that is actually water floodable. But heavy oil is something that is AGNU, for instance, that is not water floodable.
Excuse me, we have someone on the Zoom. Could you please mute your call? The sound is coming through. Thank you.
Thank you.
You sounded good, Professor, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. So why is this important? The governor already touched upon some of the important points. Besides the points that are actually mentioned on the right-hand side of the beautiful Trans-Alaska Pipeline System picture, we want to focus on local technology development and the large resource base. But the main constraint is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, because we want to make use of the diluent that still exists. TAP still carries about 50% of the light crude oil. So that diluent would actually help transport the heavy oil that we want to recover and target. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, back please. Thank you. So, building on the success to date, the Alaska North Slope Field Laboratory. So the big question is, even though polymer works, and in fact I brought a sample of the polymer. We've been talking about polymer, right? So how does it actually look like? So it looks like a powder, almost sugar-like consistency. And you add water to it, and it becomes like a gel. And that gel is something that helps push viscous oil such as this, which is on my right hand, in my right hand here. That polymer will actually help sweep the viscous oil And that is what the success that I'm talking about here. The main challenge is AGNU. And I'm showing a sample here. Now, if I turn this test tube upside down, the oil is just sticking everywhere. It does not flow. That is where the challenge is. And in the first picture there, we have proven that yes, it works for an oil which is low viscosity, kind of like maple syrup. So we can actually sweep that oil with a polymer when we add water to this. Okay? But the big question is, would it work for AGNU? Because of the contrast in the viscosity, AGNU oil is 2,000 plus centipoise. I already showed you what that oil looks like. And that is where we do have a solution, which we call polymer alternating solvent. But there are lots of challenges involved in that, moving parts, and that's the focus of our research. Thank you. So I, in fact, kind of resisted until yesterday night to put up this slide, but I do want to make a point here. And for lack of a better term, I call it the heavy oil star. Okay? And that is our graduate student, who graduated this May. He did his master's in petroleum engineering. And the leftmost picture there is the certificate. He won the SPE, Society of Petroleum Engineers, Western Regional meeting in April, and then he competed 3 days ago in Houston, competing against everybody from the world in the master's division, and won the first place. So this is first time in our history. It is a big deal for Petroleum Engineering Department, College of Engineering and Mines, and also UAF. He's working for ConocoPhillips now. Next one, please. Finally, we are grateful to the U.S. Department of Energy, Hillcorp, Alaska, for funding the JPAD polymer pilot. This is a classic example of the collaboration between the federal government, industry, and academia. And in closing, I want to thank Governor Dunleavy and the state of Alaska for funding the polymer alternating solvent project. We are very excited to work on this effort. And this would be another great example of state government, industry, and academia partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Doc. This is, like I said, a classic example where the university, through its research, can prove things up, and then we move on to the practical applications. And so with that, I'm going to ask Jill Fisk with Hillcorp, the Vice President for Prudhoe Bay, to come up and say a few words.
All right. Thank you, Governor and Chancellor White and Dr. Dandekar. My name is Jill Fisk. I am Vice President at Hillcorp, Alaska, where I'm one of the managers of Prudhoe Bay. It's my privilege to be here today representing Hillcorp, Alaska. We are proud to be the largest oil and gas operator and largest gas supplier in Alaska. Today, Hillcorp employs more than 1,500 employees in the state of Alaska, with roughly 75% of those being Alaska residents, and that number continues to increase. Earlier this year, Hillcorp celebrated our 10-year anniversary in Alaska, and what an exciting and productive 10 years that has been. Starting in the Cook Inlet and working our way up to the North Slope, we found success at reinvigorating a range of legacy assets by focusing on the details in everything we do and empowering our employees to think like an owner. At Hillcorp, one of our core values is innovation. As a result of this, we're always asking ourselves, is there a better way to do things or a different way to do things? It's this approach that played an important role in how this first of its kind Arctic heavy oil polymer flood project at Milne Point came to be. Thanks in large part to our partnership with UAF and the Department of Energy, we've successfully proven that polymer injection works on the North Slope. And not only that it works, but that it is also a commercial and economic venture on the North Slope. Since the beginning of the project about 3 years ago, we've seen the production triple in the Milne Point project wells. Instead of the predicted rate of about 300 barrels of oil per day if we weren't injecting polymer, these wells now produce about 900 barrels of oil per day with the polymer injection. That's a huge success that Hilcorp has replicated across the Milne Point field. Today, our Milne Point asset team is injecting polymer at 7 different pads in the field and into more than 30 wells, and we continue to expand that going forward. In 3 years, we've successfully proven that polymer can be shipped to the North Slope in bulk volumes, that it can be properly mixed with water to make viscous polymer solution in the Arctic, and we can continue to inject and produce that polymer. And an even better win, we only needed to inject less than 2 pounds of polymer for each extra barrel of oil that we were able to produce, which is the best polymer utilization performance reported in the world. So not only have we proven that polymer injection works in the Arctic, we've proven that it can be best in class in the world in the Arctic. We think polymer flooding has the potential to double heavy oil recovery as compared with conventional water flooding from the Schrader Bluff Reservoir. As we build on these initial successes, Hilcorp is excited about future opportunities to unlock the largely untapped heavy oil resource across the North Slope. In particular, the Agnew Formation that was discussed presents a fantastic opportunity. Hilcorp is focused on developing a process to drill and produce the Agnew, which can take years to perform the research and development required to ensure long-term success. This involves drilling wells, observing their performance, applying lessons learned to the design of those wells, and then repeating that process to continue to get better each time we do it. Having great partners like UAF and the state of Alaska will be crucial to the success as Hilcorp will continue to expand polymer flooding to additional patterns and reservoirs at both Milne Point while evaluating new opportunities across the slope, including at Prudhoe Bay. Thank you again to the Governor, your administration, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Hilcorp appreciates your continued commitment to our state and ensuring Alaska's oil and gas industry remains strong for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Hilcorp. Next, we're going to turn over to Commissioner Ike Gialopoulos. Say a few words.
Thank you, Governor Dunleavy, and thank you, Chancellor White, Dr. Dandekar, and to Hilcorp for this very momentous announcement. The Department of Natural Resources has a vested interest in the success of this project because with all of this activity occurring on state acreage, it is attempting to fulfill its constitutional mandate to maximize the endowment that this state received on behalf of its citizens. And with the potential to be able to enhance oil recovery in our legacy fields, any additional oil production means more deposits into the permanent fund. We have the benefit of over 40 years of seeding that wealth fund on behalf of all Alaskans, and that is going to be seeded thanks to the success of the world-class research that's been conducted and will continue to be at the university, and with the partnership of an endeavoring entrepreneurial spirit in our operator, Hilcorp. It's important to remember that in the past 10 years, the state of Alaska has gone from seeing its North Slope experiencing 5 to 6% year-over-year production declines to practically an arresting of that decline rate. And as you folks in Fairbanks know, as we all in Alaska know, the difference in 2 negative integers are going to be very profound when you step out at 2 different times in January. If one's a worse lower integer, then you're closer to 0. And why that matters? As we said earlier, if we're able to prolong the lives of these finite fields, we're going to be able to have more dividends for Alaskans. We're going to be able to have more resources in the hands of Alaskans yet to come. And this is building, Governor, on the leadership you've shown in your partnership with the university, whether it's working on our critical minerals potential, whether it's working with the Department of Energy on our methane hydrate potential, and working with our working interest owners on the North Slope to be able to look at the entire toolbox that the state has to bring to fulfill its constitutional mandate. We recognize that this is a developing technology and we're several years out from seeing it completely scaled up, but without these investments today, We do not have the successes of tomorrow, and today represents a very firm accomplishment of a stage gate being reached in that particular journey. And it's in that spirit that the department once again thanks the university, thanks Hillcorp, but importantly, thanks the governor for having the vision and the managerial pathway that he has set on behalf of all of our stakeholders.
Thank you, Ike. And so what we'll do now, Jeff, is open up for questions before we do a closing.
Okay, we'll start, Governor. We'll start with questions here in the room. The first one comes from Amanda Bowman with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner.
Governor, can you talk more about how this might be scaled up, or maybe one of the other folks who are here?
Professor?
So when it comes to scaling up, we have run several reservoir simulations that actually forecasts out to 2050, at least based on our JPAD polymer pilot. And the student picture that I showed, he's the one who worked on those simulations. So based on that history-matched reservoir simulation model, if I have to scale it up, then perhaps we are looking at, in the next 5 years, let's say, we're looking at the incremental oil, barrels of oil per day in the pipeline could be anywhere between 50 to about 125,000 barrels per day. Slope-wide, I'm not just talking about the Milne Point field, but slope-wide, viscous oil. And then if the pass becomes successful, we're hoping it will be successful, then that would add some more to the pipeline. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll take a question from Alex Bengal with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. KTVM.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Compared to light oil, what is the environmental impact of extracting viscous and heavy oil?
As far as impact is concerned, there is one example that I will give you directly, and that is light oil is something that is, and I got another sample here, by the way. So this is Prudhoe Bay oil. So this is something that can be easily water flooded, as we call it. So there is no environmental impact per se. But when it comes to oil as heavy as this, in other parts of the world, they use steam, which is pretty common. And of course, you know, steam means you got to burn something, so the emissions. But that's not what we are doing here. So there are no environmental impacts per se, because the polymer that gets back produced, it's kind of in a closed system, if you will. We are in fact even working on how to recycle part of that polymer and reuse it. So we're not, so that the produced water is not actually dumped anywhere, so it's actually reused, and some of that is actually excess amount is injected into disposal wells. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now go to reporters on teleconference. The first question comes from Yerith Rosen with the Alaska Beacon. Yerith?
Yeah, hi. I am familiar with this because I wrote about this when it started up. I was wondering, but I'm a little confused about the funding. Can you walk through that? From what I understood, the DOE had funded this through actually the end of this September, and it was intended, that was the scheduled funding. You know, it started before governor was elected, and I'm also wondering if there's any second thoughts about the cuts to the university that were done in 2019 in light of it.
So you're right. The funding, the research and the funding was started earlier. The idea, though, is that we continue to further the research on this particular application and then expand that to heavy oil. So with the ending of the funding from the federal government, we did not anticipate that there would be additional funding coming from the federal government for the reasons stated. So the state basically is hopefully going to take over and continue the funding to really prove this out for the viscous oil, and then continue the research for the heavy oil to unlock that as well.
All right, our next question is from Alex DeMarban with the Anchorage Daily News.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'd want to understand how much the state is committing to funding this, and then I was going to hope that Jill Fisk could talk to me about if we're producing, I think, 900 barrels of viscous oil now at Milne Point. I might have my terms confused. What could we be producing next year there, and maybe the next year, and then, then there's this heavy oil at Ugnu. I'm trying to get a better understanding of what's going on now, what will happen in the coming years from commitment from Hillcorp, and then, just my earlier question about the funding from the state, how much will that be? So if someone could help me with all those, that would be great.
Thank you. So as far as funding goes, it's $5 million, and we'll be having discussions with the University of Alaska here shortly, as a matter of fact, on next year's budget. Again, we believe there's real promise in this technology, not just for viscous oil, but heavy oil. And so in terms of future additional funding, increased funding, we're going to be having those discussions here shortly, but it's $5 million for this year. The Hillcorp people are no longer in the room. They've actually left. I think they may have had an engagement they had to go to, but so I'm not really going to be able to answer that. But I think what the professor talked about earlier on the viscous oil was scaling up over the next few years to anywhere from 50,000 barrels a day to maybe 120,000 barrels a day on the viscous oil side of things. And the heavy oil needs to be proved up. Obviously, that's going to take a little bit of time to complete that research for practical application.
Okay, and our last question comes from Dan Bross with KUAC. Dan?
What's the difference between the viscous oil and the heavy oil in terms of the challenge of bringing them to the surface?
Several challenges. As well, you're on YouTube. I don't know if or on Zoom. Sorry, I don't know if you can see my sample tubes here or not. But here is a sample which is viscous oil from the Milne Point unit. If I take this as an example, this is something that has a viscosity of about 300 centipoise. Let's consider that as like a maple syrup, perhaps. Okay, and that's something that's easy to what we call water flood. So in my slide, I showed something that we call a concept of mobility. So the water that we inject, it can actually sweep the oil. But when I say sweep the oil, of course, we add polymer to it. It easily sweeps. But then when it comes to something as heavy as the Ugnu, then that is where the challenges are, because the polymer solution of 30, 40 centipoise, so there's 40 times water, okay? When I say centipoise, that's something that will have a challenge in terms of injectivity in the formation, in the rock, okay? So that's one challenge. The second challenge that we have is whether this will finger through the heavy oil or not, and that is where really our polymer alternating solvent comes into the picture. So we want to thin this oil a little bit before we inject polymer. Thank you.
And one quick follow-up, if I may. How much more heavy oil is there? Like, how large a resource is that compared to viscous oil?
Okay, so viscous oils, again, I can refer back to the second slide that I showed. So if you look at viscous oil, then we are looking at anywhere between 12 to 18 billion barrels. And the heavy oil, such as the Ugnu, that's about the same 12 to 18 billion barrels. Not all of that is going to be easy to produce, but that's the base that we are looking at. So combined, anywhere between the numbers that we have seen in the literature, 20 to 30 plus billion barrels, combined viscous and heavy.
So, yes, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank the reporters for their questions. I really want to thank the University of Alaska for, again, proving this technology out here on the slope in Alaska. We have our challenges, as we mentioned, in the oil industry up here because of our permafrost, our climate, our weather, and a whole host of other issues that make it a little more difficult to produce oil here, let's say, than the Middle East and even down in Texas. But nonetheless, the university has taken on this challenge, as was mentioned. This began a few years ago, and it's going to continue. The idea, once again, is to prove this technology out, to apply it, to get as much oil out of the designated fields as we can, and then continue to fund the research for the heavy oil aspect of recovery. And so I want to thank the University of Alaska for this. We're going to keep working together on this. I want to thank Hillcorp. Hillcorp is a premier developer, I should say producer of especially brownfield, older fields in which we can extract more oil out of those fields. And Hillcorp is doing a great job there. And I just think there's tremendous opportunity here in Alaska, as mentioned before, in partnerships with the University of Alaska, whether it's agriculture, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's mariculture, drone technology, other types of technologies that have real day, real life practical applications in the lives of Alaskans and folks across the world. So again, I want to thank everyone. There'll be, I'm sure there'll be additional announcements as time goes on regarding partnerships and research with the university and other entities. But I think this is exciting news. Technology has been proved out. The practical application has been proved out. To the extent that we are able to extract oil in terms of the amounts, that'll, the future will determine that. But nonetheless, if we're looking at upwards of 125,000 barrels estimated now produced in viscous oil starting over the next several years, if we can do the same with the heavy oil and continue to improve upon this technology, one can only imagine that the concept of getting more oil in very large volumes is a real possibility for the state of Alaska. So again, I want to thank everybody, and thanks for attending the press conference today. And we will, I'm sure we'll be talking here shortly on other topics as well. Thank you. So thank you, Chancellor. Absolutely.